Okay. So again, welcome to our retreat, Encountering God. So for those of you who may not have been here yesterday, we are thinking through the idea of what it means to encounter God and how we can put ourselves in that space that allows us to be open, as I was saying before, receptive, and able to put our minds aside to experience that expanded consciousness that is our true nature as divine creatures, children of God, however you want to call it, that we are love, right? We don't even have love or give love. That is our nature, right? As these limited creatures that were created by God. That is part of our birthright to know that. However, in order to do that, we need to get beyond the confines of the mind. And that requires some practice, it requires some patience, and it requires some consistent tools that we go to in order to really call into ourselves that truth that our mind usually does not have access to. So yesterday, we talked about chanting and mantra as one way to get there, right? We talked about how different traditions have various mantras that allow us to really focus on a word or a phrase that encapsulates our true nature. So the mind is busy repeating that, right? Immersing itself in that truth rather than wandering and getting lost in its desires, its hopes, its fears. So all these practices are really about training. And as we get the mind to focus, we allow it to open up, to let go, and then we start to see that glimmer of our true nature. So mantra and chanting, and if anyone is interested in chanting or really enjoys going to chants, I wanted to mention that they have events called kirtan, and I'm going to put that word in the chat if you're not familiar with it. They have kirtan events where you just go and you sing, right, to different songs to God. And it's really inspiring and uplifting. And it's usually, it's often in Sanskrit, and we talked a little bit last time about maybe the difference between someone who comes from a Christian tradition and someone who is coming from, say, an Eastern tradition of Buddhism or the yogic tradition. However, there are different kinds of kirtan events also. But it's really about evoking that devotional aspect of ourselves so that we become more expansive, right? And as I was talking about yesterday, our mind tends to identify with contracted states, right? The contracted state of anger, of fear, that insists that we are small, right? That we are overwhelmed. So we want to continually immerse the mind in these other practices so that the state of expansion, the state of love, the state of openness and joy starts to become familiar to our body and our mind. And in that way, we start to move into a space where we can have that direct encounter with God. So today we're moving into scripture. Right? So scripture is another wonderful way to help the mind shift from its ordinary worries and its ordinary cares to remind it of this different space that is available to it. An important thing to remember is that it's always available, even though it's hard to grasp that for the mind. We can bring our mind to that place where we are teaching it that this is your potential, right? This is our potential as humans, and that we don't have to listen to these messages of the mind, which can be very negative, and keep us from fulfilling our path, right? Our spiritual journey. And I also do retreats on the spiritual journey, and I talk about the mind in that respect because it's important to be aware of how the mind keeps us from fulfilling our quest, right? Our highest quest as humans. So scripture is a helpful way to kind of wrap yourself in the loving embrace of the truth of your expanded self. And so today I'd like to focus on, most of the readings that we'll do will be poetry from what we call poet saints. So people from across traditions who have had that direct encounter with God, who have had that immediate experience of being completely beyond what they ever thought was possible, and communicating that in poetry. Poetry is a unique medium that helps us to go beyond the logic and the rational part of the mind, because that often gets us caught up and not able to really go into these other states that are possible for us. And so before I start reading, just to note that what we read is part of what we consume, right? So when we think of consuming, we usually think of eating, right? It's what we take in. And food and thinking about food is actually important on our spiritual journey because food can either lift us up or weigh us down, right? We can get in negative habits in terms of eating that actually hold us back because we might be kind of burying our feelings with food. We might not be eating healthy, so then we're not feeling strong and able to do our spiritual practices. There are all different ways that food can support or detract from what we want to be doing with our lives. But that also goes for other aspects of our lives that we take in, right? We take in the company of other people. So you want to make sure that you are keeping good company with other people who are uplifting, who are in line with your values. Also the news, for example, that we take in. It's very difficult to simply not get weighed down by the kind of news cycle that we have right now. So being very discriminating and discerning about how we take in the news that we take in and how understanding how it's affecting us, right? Being informed while also maintaining a sense of good stability so that we're not needlessly dragging down our mental health by taking in lots of news all the time, and we want to be taking that in from good sources. Another way we can keep good company is by doing readings that support where we want to be, right? So on our journey, we're going to have days, for example, where we have a difficult day, where we feel maybe we didn't do our best, or it was just hard, we got into a fight with someone, whatever it is. It's important to have something we can go to that will remind us that that is not who we are, right? Even if we make a mistake, if we get into a fight, if we maybe aren't a perfect parent or a perfect spouse, that we can move past that, and at the same time, our relationships and our actions don't define us, right? So what the mystic traditions tell us is that we are not defined by any of that. Our true nature really lies in that infinite expanded consciousness that the mind is not aware of. So really tapping into that gives us a whole different perspective, where the issues that the mind takes so seriously are really not as important. The mind loves to take itself seriously, and it will get into a tizzy the moment you give it some leeway. Right, so continuing to step back and let go. Letting go of the emotions, using mindfulness to let go of attachment to our emotions, especially those negative, contracted emotions, and having a reading to do. So it might just be a short reading. You can find a book that you like. It could be the Bible, if that's something you connect with. It could be one of these texts I will share with you today that has a strong reminder that you are far more than your mind allows you to believe. And I'm going to, on the chat, what I'm going to do is, well, maybe I'll do it afterwards. I'll give you the names of these books after I do the reading. So don't feel like you have to write everything down, but I will show you the covers. So one tradition that is helpful, and as I was saying before, just to finish that thought, you can even have just put a text by your bed and read a paragraph before bed, and then you might read a paragraph when you wake up, right? So you're beginning and ending your day with the highest thought, right? Usually when we wake up, at least I know when I wake up, my mind fills with, what do I have to do? Why do I have to do it? When do I have to be here? When do I have to be there? Am I late? Am I early? So all of those narratives and thoughts are running through the mind as soon as we wake up. So to really retrain the mind to be thinking in that larger context, right? That expansive context. Have something by your bed that allows you to wake up and go to sleep with the highest thought, right? Your highest purpose as a human. How are you going to serve today? How did you serve today? What did you bring to your spiritual journey differently today than it was yesterday? So having that with you can be very helpful. So I'm going to start today with the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is a Buddhist text, and this is a translation by Eckhart Iswaran, who's a very good translator and also very good teacher. So he explains this text in a way that's very accessible. And then it's giving some of the words that are attributed to the Buddha, right? So going back to that Eastern tradition, that really stresses direct experience, that it is helpful to have traditions, right, and ritual to a certain extent. However, in order to really know the divine, you have to have that experience. And so it's another level of what you may already be doing, right? By going to church, going to temple, going to synagogue. That it's a direct knowing that is very personal and individual, And that is really going to inform you. That is going to infuse you with the wisdom you need to make good decisions and to make good choices as you go along your spiritual journey. So I wanted to read from the section on joy. He writes, "Let us live in joy, never hating those who hate us. Let us live in freedom, without hatred even among those who hate. Let us live in joy, never falling sick like those who are sick. Let us live in freedom, without disease even among those who are ill. Let us live in joy, never attached among those who are selfishly attached. Let us live in freedom, even among those who are bound by selfish attachments. Let us live in joy, never hoarding things among those who hoard. Let us live in growing joy like the bright gods. Conquest breeds hatred, for the conquered live in sorrow. Let us be neither conqueror nor conquered, and live in peace and joy. There is no fire like lust, no sickness like hatred, no sorrow like separateness, no joy like peace. No disease is worse than greed, no suffering worse than selfish passion. Know this, and seek nirvana as the highest joy. Health is the best gift, contentment the best wealth. Trust the best kinsman, nirvana the greatest joy. Drink the nectar of the Dharma in the depths of meditation and become free from fear and sin. It is good to meet the wise, even better to live with them, but avoid the company of the immature if you want joy. Keeping company with the immature is like going on a long journey with an enemy. The company of the wise is joyful, like reunion with one's family. Therefore, live among the wise who are understanding, patient, responsible, and noble. Keep their company as the moon moves among the stars." So again, this idea of the company we keep, right? Who we spend time with, what we spend time with, really shapes our mind. And another wonderful idea, phrase from the Buddha is, as you think, so you become. Right? So it's that idea of what we take in is shaping our thinking without even our realizing it. So there's so much that goes on unconsciously. So what we want to do is become more conscious and take in what is going to feed us, what is going to nurture us, and what is going to open us to that sense of love, that sense of connection that we long for. So it can help to really use your practices to connect to what you are longing for. Right? Asking yourself the questions, what is my quest? Right? And also, what is my dharma? Buddha uses the word dharma here, right? Drink the nectar of the dharma in the depths of meditation and become free from fear and sin. So dharma simply means duty, and it has a sense of a sacred duty, meaning that it's your job in the world, right? So we can divide behaviors into dharmic, meaning that they serve to serve God. They serve to uphold what is just in the world, and behaviors that are adharmic, right? Behaviors that serve to break down, to divide, that avoid responsibility. So Buddha here is connecting that sense of our dharmic life to joy. And that's where we want to put our trust, in that joy that is waiting for us. We all experience moments of joy, right? We may even experience days of joy. But if we are living in the realm of the mind, that joy does not last. So what we want is to enter into that state of meditation where joy is always present, right? Where bliss is always present. Right? That's why you will hear many of the names of yogis will have that word ananda afterwards, because ananda means bliss. And that's what the yogic tradition teaches, that we are made of being, consciousness, and bliss, sat, chit, ananda. And those ideas are echoed in Buddhism, also in Christian tradition, right? And we'll be looking at some of the poetry from the Christian mystics in a moment, where they talk about that great bliss, that oneness with God. So it's a description or an experience that goes beyond description, but through the words, the commonality of the words that span across traditions, we see that this is a common experience. It's not related to one religion or another religion. It's really about this openness and connection to that which is beyond the mind. So that is a good book to add to your library if you have an inclination to Buddhism. So the next book I'm going to be reading from is Love Poems from God. This is a book translated by Daniel Ladinsky, translated and edited. And what's lovely about this book is that it does go across traditions. So it has Christian mystics, it has also some of the well-known poet saints such as Rumi and Hafiz, who are from the Middle East. So it's really bringing together a lot of the poets that we have who are able to articulate this experience and bring it to us. And so for the poetry, I encourage you to, if you're not already in a comfortable seat, to find a comfortable seat. You might want to lie down if that's comfortable for you, or you can remain seated. But just to bring yourself to a space of relaxation, of receptivity. And after I read a few of these poems, we'll have just a couple minutes of silence, meditative silence. And you can practice one part of spiritual practice that is helpful, which is really listening with your whole being. Right? So we're used to listening with our mind. And our mind always tries to decipher, tries to decide right from wrong, good from bad. It's saying, I like this poem, I don't like that poem. What we want to do here is simply be open and see what arises. Right? See if you can bypass the mind's need to pull apart and understand, and rather simply allow yourself to take it in, listen with your heart, and see what that feels like and what arises from that. So let me just grab my other book here before I begin, and you can continue to get yourself settled. Take a couple of deep breaths and let go of whatever it is that you've been doing so far today or what you're anticipating. And just come into the present moment, observing your breath, watching your mind without judgment, and taking it in. Taking in these delightful words of the poet saints. So this first group of poems will be from St. Thomas Aquinas. So I'll read his poems, his 3 poems, and then we'll sit for a little bit. He writes, Hapax University, capable of the universe are your arms when they move with love. And I know it is true that your feet are never more alive than when they are in defense of a good cause. I want to fund your efforts. Stay near beauty, for she will always strengthen you. She will bring your mouth close to hers and breathe, inspire you the way light does the fields. The earth inhales God. Why should we not do the same? The sacred flame we tend inside needs the chants of every tongue, the communion with all. As capable as God are we. Does God understand himself? Not in the form of creation. For creation simultaneously exists and does not exist. How could that not be in a mind that is infinite? Thus, God holds no one accountable, especially himself, at all. If you had a dream in which someone broke into your house and stole a certain object, would you, upon waking and finding that item still there, call the constable? Not if you were in your right mind. And whenever God wakes us and his or our thinking becomes clear, nothing is missing. And how could he not forgive then what never really happened and or what he caused? Because of my compassion, the sun wanted to be near me all night, and the earth deeded her fields to me. And all in heaven said, we have voted you our governor. Tell us your divine mandate. I did, and God will never revoke it. Nothing in existence is turned away. More tender is my Lord's heart than any heart has ever been. So when the divine realm asked me to govern it with one simple rule, I looked into his eyes and then knew what to say to any angel who might serve as a sentry to God. No creature should be turned away. the experience of something out of nothing. Is that not how one might describe magic? A hat held upside down may appear empty, though at God's command all life that any planet has ever known could dance around the hat's rim, holding hands. The root that needs no ground is He, and from that root all has come. Creation is God's litter, and all are nursed. Some grow more plump than others, indeed. Eternally amazed is the soul before God, watching Him expand, witnessing God reveal Himself to Himself. That divine intimacy, I know. Coming back to that idea of Aquinas, right? Aquinas being a very intellectual theologian. And if you read any of his works, which I do for my undergraduate class, you will see that he is not an easy read, very dense, right? But in these poems, he brings this idea of this is God revealing Himself to Himself, meaning that there is no separation between us and God. We are that. We are that divinity. The separation is only an illusion of the mind, which God also created, and has also given us the tools to go beyond. So reminding yourself of that really changes everything. So having wonderful texts with you to keep you coming back to that. And he says that divine intimacy I know, right? He's been there. He has experienced that unity consciousness. And moving on to another wonderful poet, Saint Teresa of Avila. There are many well-known women mystics in Christianity. It's kind of the one area where they were able to break through during that time when women weren't given very much attention or credence. She echoes many of the same ideas. So again, the same idea, I will read from her, and then we'll sit for a little bit of silence. Anxious to see you, I died to the world, hearing your voice at the city's edge, at the horizon of form and space. How could I then notice anything hands made? How could I adore or suffer time? Anxious to hold you, I forgot myself completely. But you did not care about the way I came to look. I mean your shape and mine. What were those? The seed husk that falls, because it could not contain our mingled feet. Anxious to see you, our souls became your glory, our eyes became your fire. All concepts of God are like a jar we break, because only the infinite can contain our perfect love. The earth and sky will open their purse for you, and your life will change if, with all your heart, you say these words each day. Teach me, dear God, all that you know. One night I walked the streets feeling desperate, in need of alchemy. A hooded priest passed by where there were no lamps. I could not see his face. I only heard these words that he kept repeating. Teach me, dear Lord, all that you know. I knew a treasure had entered my soul. I have a natural passion for fine clothes, excellent food, and lively conversation about all matters that concern the heart still alive, and even a passion about my own looks. Vanities, they do not exist. Have you ever walked across a stream, stepping on rocks, so not to spoil a pair of shoes? All we can touch, swallow, or say aids in our crossing to God and helps unveil the soul. Life smooths us, rounds, perfects, as does the river the Saône. And there is no place our beloved is not flowing, though the current's force you may not always like. Our passions help to lift us. I loved what I could love until I held him, for then all things, every world, disappeared. His hands can shape through ours, and our sounds can somehow echo what God has never said. For the divine is really speechless, it is too in love to chat. The holy wind ruffled our hair and caused a lot of commotion. We think God made some rules, but how can that be true when our souls are really the governor of all? His mind can shape through ours, our bodies and the earth, are as clay. Is that not so, my dear? I have a lovely habit. At night in my prayers, I touch everyone I have seen that day. I shape my heart like theirs, and theirs like mine. So continuing to let go. Saint Teresa calls us to let go of our concepts of God the same way we might shatter a clay jar. Our mind thinks it knows, but it doesn't. And that is very difficult for the mind to accept. The mind is always sure it can figure it out. Even when it hears the word infinite, it's like, oh yeah, I know what that means. But it doesn't. There's nothing in the mind that allows it to really understand limitlessness. And our true nature is limitlessness. But our mind can only stay in the realm of the limited, because that's what it was created to do, both the mind and the body. And they serve well in that capacity. We can do practices that help us to serve effectively in that capacity. So we're not giving up our mind or our body when we quest into the encounter for God. Rather, we're strengthening them to be helpful servants on our journey so that they are participating in our movement forward rather than taking us down the wrong path or making our journey more difficult. I'm going to do some more. We may run a little over time, so if you need to leave, I understand. You can always catch the rest when the recordings are up. But just to probably run a few minutes over time, there's so many wonderful poems to read and so much to say. So the next poet is that I'll read from is Kabir. Kabir is a poet saint from the East, someone who came from the Islamic tradition, but was really an ecstatic saint, someone who has a wonderful story, which I'll tell at a different time, behind his, finding his teacher and really immersing himself in the teachings and in his spiritual life. But someone who is very, very connected to that experience that we need to be reminded of and immersed in. If I told you the truth about God, you might think I was an idiot. If I lied to you about the beautiful one, you might parade me through the streets shouting, "This guy is a genius." This world has its pants on backwards. Most carry their values and knowledge in a jug that has a big hole in it. Thus, having a clear grasp of the situation, if I am asked anything these days, I just laugh. What kind of God would he be if he did not hear the bangles ring on an ant's wrist as they move the earth in their sweet dance? And what kind of God would he be if a leaf's prayer was not as precious to creation as the prayer his own son sang from the glorious depth of his soul for us? And what kind of God would he be if the vote of millions in this world could sway him to change the divine law of love? That speaks so clearly with compassion's elegant tongue, saying, eternally saying, all are forgiven, moreover, dears, no one has ever been guilty. What kind of God would he be if he did not count the blinks of your eyes and is in absolute awe of their movements? What a God! What a God we have! From the ocean I heard a million fish say, "Give me a beer, quick." I replied, dears, how can that be? How can a fish in the water want a drink? Well, that's how wacky things have gotten. Who else but illusion could pull a fast one like that and get away with it? Seriously speaking though, the fish in the water that is thirsty needs serious professional counseling. So Kabir, as well as the next poet I'll read, Hafiz, one of the wonderful things they bring into their poetry, as well as this, in addition to their personal knowing, right, their personal experience of being in that unitive state, is humor. Humor is really helpful for giving us that sense of perspective. It's a great stress reducer. It helps us to not be so serious. A lot of times when we come to spiritual practice and think about religious practices or even spirituality, some people tend to stay in a very serious zone. While we want to bring integrity and thoughtfulness to our practices, we also want to have that sense of joyful perspective and be able to laugh, and that's helpful as well. And that's something that this next poet, Hafiz, here in this book called The Gift, which is also translated by Danielle Ladinsky. Love is the great work. though every heart is first an apprentice that slaves beneath the city of light. This wondrous trade, this magnificent throne your soul is destined for, you should not have to think much about it. Is it not clear an apprentice needs a teacher who himself has charmed the universe to reveal its wonders inside his cup? Happiness is the great work, though every heart must first become a student to one who really knows about love. The real love I always keep a secret. All my words are sung outside her window, for when she lets me in, I take 1,000 oaths of silence. But then she says, oh, then God says, what the hell, Hafiz? Why not give the whole world my address? Two more poems. Pray to be humble, so that God does not have to appear to be so stingy. Pray to be honest, strong, kind, and pure, so that the beloved is never miscast as a cruel great miser. I know you have 100 complex cases against God in court. But never mind, wayfarer, let's just get out of this mess. And pray to be loving and humble, so that the friend will be forced to reveal himself so near. Now is the time to know that all you do is sacred. Now, why not consider a lasting truce with yourself and God? Now is the time to understand that all your ideas of right and wrong were just a child's training wheels to be laid aside when you can finally live with veracity and love. Hafiz is a divine envoy whom the beloved has written a holy message upon. My dear, please tell me, why do you still throw sticks at your heart and at God? What is it in that sweet voice inside that incites you to fear? Now is the time for the world to know that every thought and action is sacred. This is the time for you to deeply compute the impossibility that there is anything but grace. Now is the season to know that everything you do is sacred. bringing your back to that idea of sacredness. If there is no division between God and anything else, God and humanity, God and the world, God and reality, that everything is sacred. So cultivating that sense in yourself and bringing it to everything that you do brings so much more meaning to our everyday lives, right? Brings meaning to our dharma, that we do things because it's the right thing to do, even if it's not easy, right? We do things because it's helping other people, because it's upholding justice, because it is bringing joy into other people's lives, because it is enabling the world to be more fair, better in some way. And the mind and body can do that in wonderful ways and in much more joyful ways if we are connected to the sacredness of that dharma. So immersing yourself in these texts can help that in yourself when you are imbued every day with the messages that the mind is sending to you internally, the messages that our culture is sending to us externally, that all reinforce the narrative that we are limited beings, that we are just about what we can see and hear and smell and taste and touch. So coming home to the knowing, the true knowing of our unitive nature with God, is the promise of the practices. And scripture, sacred texts, poetry, all serve to help us on our journey so that we are working toward that place that we want to be, right? That abiding, loving connection with God that ultimately serves us to be open and connected to the rest of the world in a radically loving way. So I really enjoyed sharing that poetry with all of you. I hope you enjoyed hearing from some of my friends as we went through the texts. So I'll pause, as I like to do at the end of our sessions, just for any questions or thoughts from you. Thank you, Roja. Wonderful to have you here. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I'm glad you were able to join us, Anne, even though you were able to come yesterday. I'm glad to see you here today. And as I said, for tomorrow's session, the breath. So the breath work, at least I find for myself, is interesting because we look at paced breath that will feel restorative, and it's also been scientifically proven. So this particular rhythm of breathing has been studied and shown to have be very effective for calming the mind. So we bring together all these tools, right? Remembering that science is not opposed to our spiritual quests, right? The spiritual quest really embodies everything, every aspect of creation, and helps us to both give the mind a certain amount of understanding and give us those tools that are going to take us on our wonderful journey and bring us that abiding joy that we are looking for. So it looks like there are no questions. Thank you, Laverne. Wonderful that you could join us for a second day. And thanks, Joanna. Great that you could also be here. And we will pick up tomorrow with some breath at 2 o'clock again. So until then, be well, enjoy the day, and enjoy your infinitely divine sacredness in all that you do.